Tons of big news in this video, so as always, I'm going to put the timestamps in the description down below. We're going to kick things off with an AEW Fight Forever update. If you guys are a fan of wrestling video games and you're maybe wondering what the hell is going on with AEW's video game, well, now we actually have some official insight from the community manager from THQ Nordic, and this is really interesting because a tweet that was put out basically confirms what we know, which is the game isn't ready. He says, for a publisher, the game is not really ready if it's not finished until it's released, basically. A lot of people are having a massive problem understanding that, which is kind of sad because it kind of creates this thing that everybody now suddenly believes, oh my God, these guys lied. No, they didn't. So hopefully it'll get sorted out soon. The game is in a good state. As soon as we do launch it, I think people will be happy. Then everybody will just forget about all the other stuff. This was said on his Twitch stream, and basically the more and more that we learn about this, it just appears that the game is not ready for publishing stages. He also says, I'm part of the industry, so for me, that's normal that I don't expect everything to be instantly done. That is why it annoys me so much when we are now taking our time, all three houses, Ukes, THQ Nordic, and AEW, we're taking our time. We want to do this the best that we can. We want to make sure it goes through a long QA process and a long submission process. All of these things, and people are instantly like, oh, but we want the game now. Yeah, but you can't have both. You can't have a game that's out right away and then have a good game. There's only one of those things that actually matter, that works, and that matters. Now, basically, this is a very interesting topic, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but keep in mind, Kenny Omega and Tony Khan have publicly talked about the game being ready and all sorts of things. There's been a lot of confusion as to whether the game is ready or not. So now we know from an official standpoint from THQ Nordic, their community manager says it is not ready. And you know what? I just want a game that works. It is obvious that this game does not look like WWE 2K, but I've made it very clear if you watch my content, I don't want it to be like WWE 2K. I want it to be like its own thing. So that way there's a reason for me to play both, right? Both games should have its own sort of thing that makes them unique in comparison to each other. I don't know what to expect from this game, but I do know that I am excited for it. And if I have to wait a little bit longer, I'm going to be okay with that if the game comes out and it delivers on being a fun experience. Now, if it's not fun and the game is tons of bugs and tons of issues, then yeah, it's going to be a whole different thing. If you're making people wait and wait and wait, and then you're actually delivering on a crappy game, well, that's a big issue in itself. Guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about Logan Paul on his new podcast. There's obviously been a lot of talk about him and everything that's going on with WWE, but more specifically, he spoke to ESPN, and this was a really interesting story because ESPN is such a major outlet. So while speaking to ESPN, Logan Paul obviously praising himself, but he spoke about his new WWE deal and that he wouldn't have agreed to it unless he believes that a WWE title run is an actual possibility. He says, I wouldn't have signed this contract if I didn't think I was capable of getting a WWE belt. I think it'd be the coolest thing ever. I'd love to have it on my resume, and I'd love to show every kid around the world who watches WWE that you can achieve anything. Now, whether you like or hate Logan Paul, there is some good that could come out of Logan Paul holding the championship belt. And I'm not talking about the World Championship. I'm talking about any championship. Tag team, NXT title, Raw, SmackDown's US Intercontinental. Having a belt on Logan Paul could be a good thing because of his podcast is so highly viewed. I imagine Logan Paul winning the WWE Championship, any championship, and then being able to present it through all of his major outlets and social media. All that really does in turn is get viewership and excitement about what he's doing in WWE. And I think it actually legitimizes his run in WWE. We know that he's holding another contract with WWE, and it sounds like it's going to be a one-year contract, despite the fact that WWE is reporting it as multi-year. But I think that's because Logan Paul signs on from WrestleMania season 2023 to then 2024, right? So it technically would be multi-year when you look at the promotional antics behind it. But in my opinion, Logan Paul winning a championship could be really cool. And, you know, if you want to fantasy book a little bit, have somebody who really needs a title reign to take the belt off Logan Paul. It actually legitimizes them even further. When Logan Paul drops the belt, it would actually be a big deal. And there's a lot of guys in the mid-card that could benefit from that. Guys like Johnny Gargano, guys like Ricochet, which, by the way, we saw Ricochet and Logan Paul have a really awesome spot at the Royal Rumble. It wouldn't actually be a bad idea from a business perspective. Now, in terms of roster members that I would prefer to see with the belt before Logan Paul, yes, there are a lot of guys that I think deserve the belt. But if you're going from a business decision, I just can't see how that would be a bad thing. Guys, I want to turn our attention slightly back to AEW. Brian Cage was somebody that was rumored to potentially go to WWE. Then we heard about a hiring freeze, and then Vince McMahon came back, and obviously there's been a lot of questions there as far as like what's going down. Now Sean Ross Sapp from Fightful Select has actually dropped the news that Brian Cage has officially inked a new deal with AEW, and the paperwork for all of this suggests that basically Brian Cage is going to be there for multiple years. Fightful Select had learned that Brian Cage put pen to paper this week and signed a long-term, multi-year deal to remain with All Elite Wrestling and Ring of Honor. Tony Khan told Fightful after ROH Supercard of Honor that he was hoping to keep Cage and the embassy with the company for a long time. Now, keep in mind, Brian Cage was somebody who was rumored to go to WWE. Ultimately, he went to Supercard of Honor without a contract. He won the match without a contract, and in the end, he's staying put. I have no problem with this. I have no problem with Brian Cage staying put in AEW and ROH. I don't want to see him in ROH. I want to see him treated as a big deal in AEW because I think he's good enough to be positioned as a big deal in AEW. I also like to reference his career in Impact where he was a champion in Impact. He was a great champion in Impact. So I just feel like there's a lot of potential with him in AEW. So that's where I prefer to see him. But who knows what's going to happen. Right now we got Swerve joining the embassy. This could lead to some really good stories. But it just really matters where the stories take place. Is it taking place on ROH? Is it taking place in AEW Dynamite, Rampage? Like, that's the stuff that I'm paying attention to. But I have no problem with Brian Cage staying with AEW. In fact, I hope he actually got paid more because of the rumored interest from WWE. And again, this is just why it's such a good thing to have multiple large companies existing. Guys could get paid more. Guys have a reliable job now versus, just having one major company. So whether you like Brian Cage, whether you like his booking, whether you even like AEW, this is just a good move in general that is healthy for pro wrestling. So Brian Cage going and staying put in AEW definitely doesn't bother me. Of course, I would have loved to see, what WWE can do with him, but it's time for Tony Khan. Now that he's got a commitment for multiple years, it's time to do something pretty newsworthy with him. And that actually leads us to our final story, the backstage chaos in WWE. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about this, and there's two parts to it. So there's some information on Vince McMahon's contract, and then there's some information on what's happening backstage. And ultimately, this is all a big deal. Now, for those who didn't know, WWE on commentary did mention on Raw that talent were having a hard time getting to the arena. This is actually true. There was multiple reports before WWE Raw that half of the roster couldn't even make it to the Raw show due to travel issues from Orlando, Florida. So this is why WWE had a lot of major rewrites prior to the show. This wasn't Vince McMahon's doing. This wasn't Triple H and WWE having a hard time creatively. This was WWE dealing with an actual logistical problem, which we all saw what happened a couple of years ago with WWE talent not being able to make it to SmackDown. WWE had to use NXT for some backup. Now, in this case, WWE didn't have to do that. They were able to circulate the show booking totally different from what they had planned, but in a way, it was good for continuity purposes. But then also there's some news about Vince McMahon and his contract, which tells me backstage chaos could definitely continue if Vince McMahon finds himself in a very bad situation. So in an article from the Hollywood Reporter, which basically profiled the UFC WWE merger, it was reported that a copy of McMahon's latest contract with WWE, which was signed just prior to the merger and was made available via SEC filings, has McMahon bound to WWE's conflict of interest and code of conduct. According to the contract, McMahon's continued employment with WWE is contingent on him complying with this code of conduct, as well as the company's equal opportunity and non-harassment policy. Though it's not all outright stated, should McMahon violate either of these policies, it could potentially spell trouble, which obviously means WWE, UFC, Endeavor would have to let Vince McMahon go. Now, here's the thing with these types of things. It's going to be very interesting. We're starting to see what WWE is like, and there's a lot of question marks here. There's backstage chaos. Some talent aren't happy. But then, at the same time, you have Vince McMahon, who just came back after several months, who retired due to those allegations, and now he's back in a prominent role. And yet, after Raw, after WrestleMania, we saw how bad and negatively reviewed that was. Now we've gone to a situation where things are starting to get back on track. So what's really going to go down? I think that's the big question mark. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Are you guys optimistic about WWE? Are you guys not feeling so positive right now? I want to hear what you guys have to think down below.